everything. Very, very cool.
It's all about customer service.
Okay.
That's right.
Did you see that Matthew Royce published an article about us today in
It was nice.
His blog, The Knowledge Enthusiast?
I did. I got the notification on LinkedIn.
I felt like a big shot.
I did. He knows how to make you look like a...
Made us look really good, right? Which we are. I mean, we're super duper professional and legit and, like practically.
Hey. All right. We got some sounds.
Let's see here. We're going back to that screen.
There we go.
Okay. Dennis, how are you, sir?
Doing great.
We were just talking about an article that was published today on knowledgeenthusiast.com. It was a friend of ours, a guy named Matthew Royce, highlighted the podcast and asked us some questions. So while we were waiting for you, we just did our default, which is shameless self-promotion.
That always works, right? This is about sales and marketing. If there's some dead air, that's a good use for it.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Dennis.
You bet. My pleasure.
And I want to make sure I'm pronouncing your last name correct. So is it Dennis Brouwer?
It's spelled, it's pronounced exactly that way. The U is just an extra extraneous vowel in there.
Well, fantastic. So what we're doing right now is we're on YouTube Live. So anybody that wants to can be watching the video live, and they'll hear, anything we do where we're misspeaking or, we sneeze, anything like that.
Right.
And then later what we're going to do is then download just the audio, and we're going to push that out as our podcast, which will be out this Saturday.
Okay.
So listeners can find that on TriangleCast.com, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, anywhere they listen to podcasts.
Okay, great. That sounds perfect.
So I know you have a book coming out
today, I believe.
Is that today, this week?
Today it is, yeah. It's I think technically it's the soft launch today because there are additional promotional activities that are hitting in the last half of September. But today is the day, yeah. September 12th is the first day you can actually order both the Kindle and the hardcover version. So it's pretty exciting.
And what's the title of the book?
It's called The Return on Leadership, a 3-step plan to navigate change and unlock hidden growth.
And if people want to check it out, where do you suggest they look first?
Well, probably first would be Amazon because, everybody's got the one click to buy on Amazon. That's part of their power. But it's also on Books A Million and Barnes and Noble.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so any of those 3 retailers would be great places to pick up the book.
Now, is that hard copy too?
Yep. So there's the soft copy version on all 3 of those locations, and hard copies available as well on all 3. I actually have, just to prove the existence, I have a hard copy right there. There it is. It's a real book. They're in inventory right now out there in the world. Yep.
I like the cover a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, we actually put a lot of work into that. It's a crowdsourced design, and at some point I'll have a blooper reel and I'll show all the designs that didn't make it into print.
Yeah.
But it's the fundamental sort of argument behind the book is that good leadership isn't something you do just because you're a nice person and because you want to make people feel good. Good leadership is great business, and there's a financial return for investing in leadership. So the themes that you see here, there's a little bit of a silver and gold theme there. And then the symbol that we actually have here has, if you can see it closely there are 8 points on it. A lot of the research in the book was done by a guy named Bob Anderson and his partner, Bill Adams, who run a company called the Leadership Circle. They do a leadership circle assessment that assesses leaders across 8 dimensions. 8-pointed star, nice tie-in. So
yeah.
Gotcha.
And we have plenty of questions about your journey into creating the book and publishing and everything, but maybe we could start a little bit with your background. And so maybe could you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, that'd be great. I think I have a unique background. I think I'm the only person with this background. Grew up in the Midwest, ended up joining the Navy flight program. Spent 8 years as a naval flight officer, and 5 years of those were as part of a crew that hunted Soviet fast-attack nuclear submarines in the North Arabian Sea, which is kind of a unique experience for a kid from a farm town in Minnesota. Got out of the Navy after 8 years and began a career in business. So I was a bag-carrying salesperson, quoted salesperson selling to corporate accounts for about 6 years. And then I moved into product management. I spent the next 20 years in product management and eventually corporate management at a Fortune 500 company. So I've got a range of sales and marketing experience, a lot of product experience, P&L experience, but it's all sort of done within the context of those first 8 years that I spent in a very tactically focused environment, very unforgiving environment that's really focused on teamwork and very crisp decision making. Because you know what? In 4 hours you run out of gas. So if you need more time, it's too bad. You're going back to the ship and you didn't get your job done. So it brings a certain kind of focus to it.
It's. Have you ever heard of Bunker Labs?
I don't think that I have.
So and we can send you some links after the show and put some links out on our site in the show notes. But what they are is an organization that helps veterans start businesses. And their local founder, a guy named Dean Bunchu, we had him on a few episodes ago, and very quickly the conversation turned to folks that were in the military and how they have a really they have a really natural talent in sales once they've left the military. And I, outside looking in, I attributed that to being hard to phase, like for folks that have
definitely some of that, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like rejection probably isn't as bad for somebody with that kind of background, right? Getting hung up on or told like, "Hey, we're not going to buy," doesn't really land as hard on somebody who's been in combat, for instance.
Yeah, you told me no, you didn't shoot at me, right? I mean, that's kind of the infantry version of it. The naval aviation version of that is, one of the case studies in the book is about when I ran the network part of a global IT services company, and it was pretty ugly, right? As far as business goes, it was ugly. I mean, pieces were falling off the business. But even at the end of the really bad days there, I could look at my team and say, hey, no airplanes in the water, nobody got hurt. There's nothing's on fire. It might feel like it, but it actually isn't.
Right.
And one of the things that naval aviation training does for a person is it actually teaches you to be calmer under stress. So as the stress cranks up, somebody in that airplane has to remain calm, because otherwise your decision making falls apart. So you still feel the stress, but you react, I think, differently because of that. And that does bring, there are definite benefits to that in business. I have definitely experienced that. It's interesting you talk about that transition from the military, because I mentioned that the book is based on research from the Leadership Circle, but the fundamental reason the book exists is because I flew with a guy 30 years ago, my Navy pilot, a guy named J.P. Kelly, and after we were in naval aviation for 5 years, I did my shore duty and then got out and went into business. Well, he stayed in for 26 years and 3 command tours and a very successful tour. And we didn't talk for 25 years, not because we parted in any kind of bad way, but because we just went off and lived our lives. And after we got back together after 30 years, we started to compare notes. And I'd spent the last 25 years in corporate America, and he'd spent it continuing on in naval aviation. And what we found was that the challenges were really the same. The people were the same. Most of the issues were the same, and a lot of the same approaches were. So that transition from the military into the civilian marketplace, you do bring those skills over. They are relevant. You use them in an environment that's very difficult for somebody who's only ever been in a corporate environment to study. But once you see them applied any place, they're kind of universal, because they're, it's just dealing with people. And actually the military leader can't give a raise, can't change what the mission is, can't change when you're going to sea. All of those things that you kind of have available to you in the civilian workplace are completely impossible for the military. So you really do have to rely on building relationships and getting people on board with what you're trying to accomplish and taking care of your people and that sort of thing. It's very relevant.
Yeah. And when was your first experience with leadership?
I would say that my first real experience with leadership in a meaningful sense was after I went through the first 2 years of flight training, which is very much an individual thing, right? You're a student going through a training program. But after that, you go into the squadron. And in your squadron assignment, there's probably 250 to 300 people in the squadron, and they do everything from maintain the airplane to, file paperwork. And as a very, very, very junior officer, you're given control of a group that could be, could be 4 or 5 people doing paperwork in that era. For me, my first job in the squadron was I had, I think, 18 or 20 guys who, again, reported to me, but they'd all been in the Navy for at least 5 or 6 years. Some of them been in for 12 or 15 years. They knew the ropes far better. They knew ropes that I didn't even know existed. But I was ostensibly the head of that group, and that was really my first leadership experience. It was eye-opening. I still look back on it some and cringe, but I definitely learned from that.
And then when you transitioned into corporate America, was it into a leadership role or?
No. I guess I should add a little bit to that last question. There were really 2 kinds of leadership that I experienced in the Navy. One was you had your ground job, which is where you were responsible for some function in the squadron that was necessary to keep the lights on, keep business going. And then when you got in the airplane, that was a different thing, right? So after a year and a half in the squadron, I became a mission commander, and I was responsible for making sure that the mission happened safely and effectively. And that was a much more real-time sort of urgent sort of thing. Like I said, you took off from the ship, you ran your mission, and that was your experience. Now, when I transitioned into the civilian workplace, my first job was as a sales rep at IBM. So I went directly into what we would think of as an individual contributor role as an individual sales guy, and spent most of the first year doing menial sales assistance and sales administrative tasks at IBM, because my real job was to learn how to sell in the IBM way. So that's what I did. And then I spent the next 4 years as an individual contributor. I had no responsible for anybody else. I was responsible for my territory and making sure that, I made my numbers. Yeah.
And when was your first experience with leadership in the corporate world?
I was promoted. I got my MBA, always wanted to go into marketing. Finished up my MBA in marketing, realized that I could make about enough money to starve, and that marketing degrees are great, but sales jobs pay the bills. So I spent my 5 or 6 years in sales, but I was still interested in marketing. And an opening occurred in a manager product marketing role, and I moved into that. And I started out with a small team of 4 or 5 people, and a manager role there. And 2 years later, I think I was director, and 2 years later after that, vice president. We were in a growth market, and growth brings opportunity, of course. Mm-hmm. And I think my team ended up with about 35 people. So that was one linear role where the responsibilities grew from a part of the domestic market to full domestic market to international expansion, and from 4 people to a dozen people to, I don't know, I guess a couple dozen people.
Was there anything you observed at the time that later became ideas that you would use in the book?
Yeah, I mean, all the experience I've had over the last few decades has played into the book. Really, I think the central thing that came out of it for me was there were approaches that I wanted to take to kind of collaborative leadership. Because my fundamental orientation was, and my fundamental training was, I spent close to 1,000 hours in a Navy cockpit. There were always 3 other guys in there. I couldn't do anything without the 3 of them, and they couldn't do anything without me. So I grew up in this, kind of matured in this small team environment where you had open communications. You expected everybody else to be really good at their job, and they expected you to be good and present and doing all the right things, because the consequences were quite severe and quite immediate. And what I think the real spark for the book for me came from trying that collaborative approach in a variety of environments, in sales roles where I was just working with peers, and then in roles where I became a leader and I was working with my team or my peers or my boss. And I had a variety of those over the years. And what I found was that sometimes it worked really great, and sometimes it didn't work at all. And I really wondered about that. If I'm taking this approach that, I've seen work in the Navy, and it's there because other approaches have been tried and failed with horrific consequences. It worked in that really high intensity environment. And now in corporate America, it works some places and it doesn't work in others. Why is that? So it sort of energized the social media or the social science gene in me to kind of look at that. And ultimately that led me to, over the last 3 years, I've learned about an area of research called adult development theory that really says, those environments that you work in, the level of creativity that exists there, and typically the growth that you experience as individuals, as teams, and as companies flows from not really the personality of the leader at the top, but the perspective of the leader at the top. And the two biggest perspectives that are relevant are reactive and creative. Reactive people tend to have a short-term focus. Ultimately, they're motivated by some kind of fear, insecurity about the role that they're in or what they're setting out to do, maybe what the mission of the organization is. Creative people, which are creative leaders, which are about 20-25% of leaders, tend to have a longer-term focus and are much more focused on the outcomes we're driving towards as opposed to outcomes we're trying to avoid. It's a difference between making the trains run to new and interesting places versus keeping it from jumping the tracks. And that spark for that, that inquiry on my part really came from my experience moving through different corporate roles and working for different people and then seeing my peers do the same kind of thing.
Nice. Now, Dennis, we wanted to also talk about maybe some of the hardships you had to go through when actually, writing the book and maybe writer's block or, any of those challenging situations that you might have went through. Of course, we went through those ourselves, me and Jason here. So do you care to elaborate on maybe what were some of the challenges of getting your book together?
Yeah, that's actually one of the funnest aspects of the book, I think, because it has a happy ending, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people at writer's block and they live with a blank sheet of paper for the rest of their lives, right?
Yeah.
I think we can all relate to that. I had the first inclination about writing a book back in like 2005. And I think there are some fragments of what I scribbled down on Saturday mornings back in 2005 that made it into the book today. But by about the end of 2015, I was just stuck. I had some ideas and I thought they were pretty good, but it's just like, man, I couldn't decide on the voice I wanted to take. There were just a whole bunch of things that were all wrapped up, and I was just stuck. So I ended up taking a full-time job, running sales at the largest speakers bureau in the country, actually, in Washington, D.C. And it was a really interesting job. It came to me through a headhunter. It wasn't like I pursued it, but once a headhunter told me about it, it's just like, hey, this sounds really interesting. You're going to go represent kind of name brand people for their events and selling those. So it's like, all right, I want to do it. Yeah, but there's a downside. And the downside was that we live about, I'm tempted to say an hour west of DC, but it's completely traffic dependent. So we're 55 miles west of the Lincoln Memorial, which if you drove at 10:30 on Saturday morning, that takes you 55 minutes. But if you drive that on Monday morning, that takes you 2.5 hours. So it's just like, oh my God, if I drive that, that's going to be horrible. I have a theory about commuting that if your commute is less than 30 minutes long, you think about work, right? Oh, that meeting I just came out of, what I got to do tomorrow. If it's between a half an hour and an hour, you think about the drive, like, wow, is there something going on up ahead? There must be a wreck. I wonder if anybody got hurt. And if it's longer than an hour, you think about your life. How much time am I spending in this car? So you don't want to do that twice a day, 5 days a week. Have that sort of introspection about
smart move
with my life. So I thought I can't drive that. That's not going to work. So I checked into commuter options, and what I finally settled on was I could drive about 10 minutes to a bus and ride the bus for 45 minutes into Arlington. I go walk about another 10 minutes to a metro stop, and then ride metro for like another half hour, and then a 5-minute walk. So if everything went perfectly, it was an hour and 45 minutes or so. If the balloon went up and anything happened, it was 2 plus 15, 2.5. So I thought, all right, so I got to figure out how to cope with this. So for the first 3 months, I watched videos, I read books, and I just thought, okay, coping, coping is not working anymore. I've got to find a reframe this. And it was about that time that an author named Neil Pasricha came into the office to talk with us, as our speakers did from time to time. And he told a story about breaking his writer's block. And he just said, he was director of human resources at Walmart at the time. And he said he cut a deal with himself to say, you can't go to work until you write 1,000 words. It may be the same word over and over again. It may be terrible. You may be copying down what you just read in the newspaper, but you've got to write 1,000 words. And I took that as inspiration because I just said, that's exactly where I'm at. And what I started to do was I said, I'm just going to start writing my book. I mean, I've got to start somewhere. So I grabbed my Mac and threw it in my backpack. And every day I wrote 800 words on the way in and 800 words on the way home. And within about 3 weeks, which I guess is how long it takes to create a new habit, I was completely hooked. I mean, I could write on the metro. I could go into writing mode in 60 seconds. And I started cranking it out. And it went from me thinking of, man, I'm trapped in public transport. I hate this, but I can cope. I can deal with this, to thinking, you know what? I've got, between metro and the bus, I've got an hour and a half of uninterrupted private time. I pull my Mac out and I'm in my bubble, and I have an opportunity now to produce 800 words. And I started that in July. And by December, I had a pretty good working manuscript, enough to float to a publisher, who eventually became my publisher. And I rewrote it 2 more times on the metro between then and January. And you know what? It turned out great.
Nice. Now, can we ask, have you ever thought about going the self-publishing route, or was it always just, going the publishing route, having someone publish and do all the work for you?
Let me shut this off a second because it's stinging there.
Okay.
Yeah. So I looked at all the alternatives. Kind of a classic publisher, doing complete self-publishing. Just log into Amazon and crank it out yourself. And the publisher that I chose is a company called Fast Pencil, and they're a hybrid publisher. So it's not a classic New York publisher in that sense, but you're not just left completely to your own devices. So I got assistance from them along the way. Had a great deal of latitude. That cover design, I was involved in that, in every aspect of that. Mm-hmm. And all those decisions along the way, I had a very, very free hand, but they kind of put bumpers around you to go, our experience shows that if you take that approach, that might not be the best way. So let's look at another way. So for me, I have a background in sales and marketing. So I'm comfortable kind of rolling up my sleeves and diving into that level of detail. So the hybrid publishing really, really worked for me has worked for me so far for this book anyway.
That's a fantastic story, though, about how you reframed your environment, right?
Yeah.
The way I stumbled on podcasts, which I now love, and obviously we have our own that's nearly 40 episodes in, was with an hour-long commute. I just got tired of the radio. I got sick of music, to the point where I've always loved music, and I just stopped enjoying it all of a sudden. And
I used to love,
Yeah, and then tried audiobooks for a little while, which was fine, but from the formatting of it, it just didn't always hold my attention, and I'd find myself zoning out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
that felt like a pretty big win, to go from, Elizabeth Gilbert has her description of it, and it's she has her own term for it. It's a crap sandwich, and she says every great opportunity comes with that, and it's just like, well, yeah, but I mean, you can only belly up to the bar for that for so many days before you just got to find a better way to look at the world. Especially if you're gonna do something that you love, that you want to love doing, and you need to be creative about it. You need to be able to engage. You just gotta find a new way to look at the world.
You mentioned that only 25% or so of managers are in more of that creative sort of space. I'm getting a little feedback here. Do you hear that as well?
I don't. No.
Yeah. Corey, are you hearing it in your?
Yeah.
Let me see here. I'm going to turn down this a little bit and see if it makes a difference.
I'll turn my volume down a little bit too.
Yeah, we still want to make sure you can hear us. So 25% of managers are in that more creative space. They're thinking about the future. They are inspiring others, ideally, right?
Yeah.
That means that 75% of leaders that are out there are, number one, themselves working with fear, and number two, trying to use fear to motivate others. Is that about right?
It's close. There are actually about 5% that are what are called integral leaders, and they actually exist in a place that's above the creative leader in terms of the ability to work with people and focus on a future worth caring about and that sort of thing. So the ultimate example of that is there are two from different eras, Abraham Lincoln and Nelson Mandela. I mean, sky high integral leaders. But yeah, the math is actually right that about 65 or 70% are below that creative range. Sometimes not significantly below it, but there's probably a solid 50% that are down in that range of like, clinically the way it's described is every time a creative leader gets involved, the likelihood is that things will get better. The clouds will clear. You'll be able to solve problems. The team will come up with new solutions, that sort of thing. When a reactive leader, one of those, those kind of bottom half leaders gets involved, things get more complicated, get bogged down in your problems, your time horizons move in, and they might not, I think generally aren't using fear as a way to manage people so much as they are sort of fearful of outcomes. So you find a lot of dialogues in organizations like that where there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty about the future because there's really a fear of stepping back and going, okay, let's not talk about today or next week or next month. Let's talk about what we want this place to be in 3 years. And people at that point just go, whoa. It's either, I don't have a crystal ball, how can I do that? Or it's just like, I think it'll be just like today. It's like, well, the answer is almost always something in between. In this day and age, it's going to be different than today, maybe dramatically different. And nobody's expecting you to predict the future, but we are asking you to think about it. And if you get your people together who've been working in that environment every day, a lot of times they have really great ideas, but maybe more importantly, they have great insights. Hey, this is where I think the market is going. This is what my customers are asking me about or asking me for, and we don't have a great response to that. Or my customer told me that a competitor is doing this and that, and they're headed this direction. What does that mean to us? And those kinds of, I personally find those kinds of conversations really energizing. A lot of people find those conversations, believe they're distractions and getting in the way and not a productive use of people's time. So the reactive leader tends to pull back from that future view, pull back into the detail, and you end up just going, well, the future, don't worry about the future, it'll be just like today. Next year will be just like last year. Just get to work, just execute. So the really fundamental difference that you see is, I hammer over and over and over again in the book on the definition of leadership is taking ownership of three things. It's vision, engagement, and execution in that order. So vision is that view of a shared view of a future worth caring about. Engagement is helping each person understand their role in achieving that. And then execution is, hey, great, we're all going to get to work and we're going to unleash the collective power in this individual action and independent thought. But it's done in the context of where we're going together. Reactive organizations and organizations run by reactive leaders tend to do it the other way, right? They say, let's just get to work. Let's get really good at what we're doing. It's like, well, that's great until what you're doing is suddenly irrelevant, right? Until you're the best producer of high definition color film in the world like Kodak, and nobody wants color film anymore because you didn't think about the vision, which might have surfaced digital photography. Now, there's a whole other thing about actually doing something about it, but that's the difference that we see, that you start with vision, go to engagement and execution, as opposed to start with execution and get so wrapped up in that you get to the point where you're trying to figure out how to get people to care about the execution and focus more on that. And vision is just this thing that's like, yeah, well, we're not going to worry about that. And you tend to get blindsided over and over and over again. We see it as, the internet smacks industry after industry. It's because people are focused on day-to-day execution without the context of the vision.
I've worked for people that try to use fear as a means of motivating people. And I've said on the podcast previously, like it doesn't really work on me. I don't know if it's from an age standpoint, I'm too close to being a millennial. I don't know if it's just, something different, but there's very little, like a sales director saying like, if you don't do X, then you're out of here. I'm kind of like, oh, okay. It's like, and maybe part of that is like the entrepreneur gene as well, is knowing that there's other ways to make money than by collecting a paycheck from a company that you work for. But I think those people tend to make their staff miserable.
Well, they do, and they certainly make them unproductive. And the argument you tend to get from people like that when you, I won't say confront them about it, but when you draw their attention to it, and leadership assessments can do that, interviews can do it, questioning can do it. When you draw their attention to it, they tend to respond with, "That's what I have to do to get things done." And it's just like, no, that's not what you have to do to get things done. That's what you have to do to get compliance. And you do it long enough and you'll get malicious compliance. Right? And people are smart. You can train them very quickly. That, okay, here he comes again. I'm gonna get smacked for trying to do the right thing. It's just like, I've got a solution. I'll stop trying. Mm-hmm. And it turned very quickly into this thing where people just kind of lean back and cross their arms and go, "I'll tell you what, you seem to understand everything about this. How about if I just sit here and wait for you to tell me what to do? Because sooner or later you're going to do it anyway." But the problem is that conversation doesn't happen in the open. It happens in their heads. And the only result is people lean back, they decide to wait and see what happens. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where the organization slows down, the communication slow down. You tend to have people being told what you think they want to hear, and the whole thing just unravels. It happens really quickly. Why would you hire the best and smartest people that you can and then tell them what to do? Mm-hmm. It just over and over again, it's been shown it doesn't work.
Now, do you think that there is hope for that 65%? Do you think there's a way that they can be turned around, or do you think it's nature?
Well, I think both of those questions I would say yes to. If you look at stages of adult development, it tends early on to mirror chronological development. So if you look at most teenagers, they're very self-centered. They're very about, hey, what's happening tonight? What's happening in an hour? What's happening right now? But people gradually grow out of that. Some of it is the way we all start and the growth opportunities that we have along the way. So the good news is anybody can grow and become a more capable leader. The not so great news is that a lot of times it doesn't just happen in a nurturing environment where you're working for a great boss who sort of tugs and pulls and really encourages you to grow and challenges you in a reasonably safe space, right? Gives you that stretch assignment. A lot of times it happens in crisis. So a lot of people who've been very reactive leaders are placed in a crisis, a business crisis, a personal crisis. It could be, hey, I just got fired. Whoa, where did that come from? Without my job, who am I? Those kinds of crises. It can be very, very personal things that don't have to do with employment, and they can change. And one of the biggest examples of that we can all go read the biography if you want, but it's Nelson Mandela, right? Nelson Mandela, before he was incarcerated, was a fire-breathing revolutionary that was involved in violence. And I mean, he was the real deal. I mean, he was down there, that reactive leader. He was causing fear, living in fear. The whole country was wrapped up in that. He spent 27 years in prison. He could have come out the most bitter man imaginable. But in that crisis, he grew. And his perspective became much broader, much more based on love instead of fear, and much more based on what are the possibilities of what we can do together instead of, if I win, you must lose, right? So the biggest thing in moving people, as a leadership coach, the biggest thing that I've learned is that the important thing is not so much to just kind of nail people for where they are. It's to help people where they are and then understand the motivation for growth. Because if you can get people to see, everything's not a nail. You don't have to hit it with a hammer. You've got lots of other options available. You're not accustomed to them, so they'll feel awkward when you first starting asking people for their opinions and then shut up and listen. That's going to feel really awkward because you're going to feel like you'll feel fearful because you're not in control. But to be able to set that control down for a minute or two, and then maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and then maybe for a day or a week, and really welcome that in. It feels very uncomfortable. But as people do that, and as they're willing to try that, they'll find that, hey, you know what? My team is responding better. And you get this sort of if-then logic going. It's just like, okay, if I loosen the reins up a little bit here, the team works better. Maybe I'll loosen them up a little more. They'll work a little better. And
can you hold on one moment? We've got just one quick interruption.
Okay.
I left something here. I just want to see if it was still.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. So yeah, we broadcast out of a startup incubator called the RTP Frontier here in North Carolina, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the first floor of that is all free co-working space. And anybody can walk in, open up a laptop, and get to work. And another aspect of that is free conference rooms that can be rented for up to 2 hours.
Okay.
So we record out of a free conference room every single episode of TriangleCast. We've had the founder or some of the people that were involved in the founding of this organization. We've had them on the podcast previously. But because we're in like this otherwise free space, we get some like technical glitches and issues that other podcasts might not experience.
Yeah. Like, what is that noise? Who is that person? What are you doing?
Yeah.
Right.
Pretty much.
Or, hey, did we not book the time appropriately? And now there's like a whole group of realtors that have this conference room and they're kind of staring at us, wondering what we're doing. So that's what that was. There was a gentleman that thought he left something in here previously.
Yeah, no problem.
There was a guest we had on last week. Her name is Melissa Kennedy, and she founded a company called 48 Innovate. She has a book out there as well. But you might be interested in hearing that because one of the things that she discussed, or really the central point of everything she's trying to do, is that your people are where your innovation lies. You don't have to go hire like a McKinsey or a Deloitte to come in and tell you how to innovate. You have people internally right now that are brilliant, and they can help you with that.
Yeah. Well, I've worked with a lot of consulting firms. The business that I did the turnaround on, when I got there was a consulting firm that was advising on how to sell off the business. And a year later, there was another one advising on how to sell off the business. And I've been involved with a number of those over the time. I've been at 2 companies acquired by major Southern telecoms, one acquired by WorldCom, which was just as much fun as it sounds, and then acquired by CenturyLink. And the consulting firms were in on all of those. And the irony of it is that as a middle or senior level manager, when a consulting firm comes in, the first thing you have to do is educate them on your business, right? So they talk to you, they talk to all your people, and then they come back, 3 weeks or a month later and say, so I think I've got an understanding of your business, and now we're going to start talking about innovation. It's just like, and the value add is what exactly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what I did in 2008 when I took over as Savison and we were acquired by CenturyLink and merged in another, overnight I went from having $275 million in revenue to $3 billion in revenue, right? The team went from 25 product managers to 130 product managers. And what I did is I got the top 12 people in a room for 2 days and said, okay, where are we taking this thing? And the ideas that came out of that, really, really propelled the business forward for us. Because you're right, people know. In many cases, they've been trying to carry the argument forward, and they're frustrated because they can't get anybody to listen. So before bringing in another consultant to tell you what to do, it's just like, just ask your team. It can't hurt, right? So, yeah. I agree with that.
Do you? So this podcast is all about bending the rules. So TriangleCast's motto is bend, break, and hack, right?
I saw that, yeah.
So the rules might tell you that, well, to be a leader, you need to start at the entry level. You need to work your way up. You need to, put in 60 hours a week, and you need to do the job before you're being paid to do the job. And, blood, sweat, equity.
Climb the corporate ladder.
That said, the spirit of our podcast is, how do you hack that? How do you get there quicker? How do you get there with less effort? That way you can spend your time doing the things in your life that you want to do. So that would be my question for you is there a way to become a leader? Is there some 80-20 rule? Is there some shortcuts that one can take to get that experience?
Yeah. Well, I love that expression, the corporate ladder. Remember that? Yeah, every time I climbed on, somebody came on and kicked it over. So I bought it and folded it up and left. Right? Yeah, the corporate ladder. That was good times. It's not there anymore. I mean, companies have this relentless focus on pulling cost out of organizations, and when they look at middle management, they go, "Hey, what's that layer doing in there? I mean, really, what are they doing?" And we experienced it. We got acquired by WorldCom. We had directors in our managed services business, and you could be a director if you had 6 or 8 people reporting to you. And they came in and said, a director, it says in the handbook, a director must have 125 people reporting them or they can't be a director. It's just like, okay, let's, right? We got a whole bunch of people who are going to go away if that's the way it's going to be. So I would say that, yeah, your observation that the corporate ladder is no longer relevant is dead on. My advice and my experience is that the best way to train to become a leader is to act like one. And I think it's Amy Cuddy who talks about fake it until you become it. And, some of that is the way you show up, and used to be a focus on the way you dress for success and all that kind of stuff. My take on it really is that the best leaders I've ever worked for are influential, right? Actually, some of the worst ones are influential too, but the best ones are influential for good, right? In helping to create a vision and helping other people to get their jobs done. So my encouragement to people is to build their influence. And it's just like, okay, well, that definitely sounds like motherhood and apple pie. But what I encourage people to do specifically, the diagnostic tool that I use for leadership assessment is basically a 360 tool where the people around you, your peers and direct reports and boss's boss assess you and how you're doing as a leader. That doesn't really work until you've been leading an organization for at least 12 or 18 months, and then that'll change over time. But you can hack that, okay? And the way that you hack that is you turn that process inside out. So instead of saying, I'm going to have all these people around me assess me and how I'm doing in this job, I'm going to pretend like in 2 years they're going to assess me for how I'm doing in this job. So in 2 years, who would I have assess me? Well, the people who work for me, my peers, my boss, and my boss's boss. And it's like, what do I want them to say about me in 2 years, and how do I want them to view me? And what it turns into is a system. I think this is in chapter 9 of my book, where you draw. I mean, I sometimes refer to it this way: you draw your snowflake, and what that means is you put yourself at the center of a diagram, and you look at the people around you in an org chart and go, okay, what is that person trying to get done? I'm not going to focus for right now what I need to get done. What's that person trying to get done? I need to understand their challenge in this organization and their mission. Now, what would they really love to have from me to help them get their job done? It's like, great. So I've looked at it from their perspective. By the way, that begins to boot up the creative thought process. Now what I can do is to look at them and go, what do I need from them to get what I want, right? And that's not in a Machiavellian sense. That's just a practical, all right, if I'm going to be successful selling network services, somebody else has to be successful installing them and supporting them. So they're going to need my help in doing that, all right? Now, if I'm going to help them accomplish their goal, I'm going to ask them to help accomplish mine. And that's not a transaction. It's going to become a relationship. What does that relationship have to be like, and how do I keep that moving forward? Well, if it's my boss, I need a half an hour face-to-face with my boss once a week to say, hey, boss, this is what I'm working on. What else do you need from me? Here's what I need from you. My peers, I don't know, maybe it's an hour every 2 weeks. The rest of my organization, if I've got multiple layers, a complex organization, it might be once a month. And it might be a video chat. It might be an email to a group. But I really encourage people to really look at where you're at in the organization and what influence you can have. How can you make other people successful? What do you need from them to make you successful? And what's the nature of the relationship that you need? And write that down, and especially write down your communications plan. I will set up a one-on-one with my boss every week or 2 weeks. I'll talk to my peers. I'll have lunch with my peers twice a month. And really, as you meet with those people, keep that in mind. Hey, how's that project going on? Going that we talked about. Here's how mine's going. And 2 weeks, if you could help me out on this, I'd really appreciate it. Have that give and take. If you start to do that, you begin really to think creatively in the clinical leadership sense, because you really practice not just your perspective, which is really easy. You practice taking the perspective of others on you and on their challenges, and it just gets you thinking more broadly. And along the way, you'll develop a much better understanding of the broader organization, whether it's a business or a nonprofit or whatever, and that just positions you for leadership. So it does take a little, Saturday morning, sit down with the legal pad and kind of sketch it out and go, okay, who are these other people? What are they trying to get done? How can I help them? What do I need from them? Let's build a relationship to support that.
Yeah, how do you communicate? What tool set do you use to communicate that kind of thing?
Yeah, I feel like we're going to get a bill after that.
We'll promote his book. How about that?
Yeah, that's all it takes.
Yeah, definitely. But I did have a question. I was going actually through the intro of your book this morning on Kindle. And I read where you said, I guess when companies run into hard times, the leaders or the companies, they make a decision to not decide on anything. And that stuck out to me because, I guess in the time of hardships, it's kind of, I'm not going to move. I'm just going to sit still. And that's one principle that I do kind of live by is when things are going hard, I don't, just jump around and move. I just kind of sit still. So I think that kind of struck me because it kind of goes against my principle just a little bit. So I wanted to know if you could maybe elaborate on kind of what that means to you as far as companies not deciding when it's time to decide.
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's an interesting area of discussion and research. There was one of the first business books that I read that really had a profound impact on me was by a guy named Clayton Christensen, The Innovator's Dilemma. Came out about 20 years ago. I bought like 10 copies and gave it to all my peers in the business I was working at the time because we were in a business that we were in a networking business selling private networks as the internet was just kind of cresting the horizon. It's just like, what is that thing? I think we better take that seriously, right? So if you look at Clayton Christensen's book, he's got examples in there that some of them are technology. It was disk drives and how they were replaced, that sort of thing. But it was also one of his great examples is a drag shovel that's used for coal mining and how it was replaced by hydraulics and how the companies that made these drag shovels were completely blindsided by hydraulics. So, there are examples in every industry. What you see is that leadership gets very focused on eking out the incremental gains. So this, and especially if you're a public corporation, you're measured quarterly. So you got to make another penny a share this quarter compared to last quarter. So you don't make any big changes, right? You tweak it, you tighten it, you open a small new market, you maybe fire a few people here, you dial back benefits there, you abandon some office space to get those costs. You don't make big changes. And typically what happens is a disruptive competitor comes in, starts low in the market with what you as the premium provider view as a crappy product with crappy service. You go, that's a crap market. They can have it. We don't want it. We can't make money there. And next year they get a little better, and the year after that a little better, and the year after that a little better. And then all of a sudden they're like right here, and you're going, oh my God, what do we do about these guys? Because they've taken the bottom 40% of the market, and because they've had to make a living down there, they've got their costs under control. They're very streamlined in the support model, and now they're coming to get us. They're coming to eat today's lunch, not just like this market that we had abandoned. So I mean, I've spent, like I said, I've been in companies that are acquired by telecoms, and telecoms are notorious for it, right? That you cling to the past. Remember the dial-up phone line, right? Your house phone. I'm telling you, that the profit margin in good old copper phone lines to your house is unreal. And to get companies like that to move to voice over IP, I've seen the business models, and your margins drop from 80 or 85% to 10 or 15%. And if you're a business leader, you're looking at it going, okay, my margins are going to be cut, are going to be gutted. What does that mean to my staff and to my benefits and the quality of my office space and how much vacation I get? I don't think voice over IP is real. Let's just cling to what we're doing for another quarter and see what happens. And it's another quarter, another quarter, another quarter. And then you look around and go, wow, what happened to my business? It's kind of gone. I'm not growing. I'm declining at 5%. And now I don't have the money to invest in R&D. I'm really behind the curve and kind of dead. And if we see the combination, I talk about this in the book, the combination of globalization, where we've now got this global market with dirt cheap labor We are now competing with people in any country around the world, and then advancing technology. So somebody, with technology like we're using here can start a new business that in the past would have taken $5 million worth of capital. Well, if you're the company with the $5 million invested in capital, you look at that and go, do I walk away from that? I mean, what do I do? So it tends to paralyze people. It really does.
Are you currently running your own business?
So what I'm doing is completely focused on marketing my book and the concepts behind it. So I'm available for consulting and then going into organizations and speaking about the principles in the book, because the need is definitely there.
So we've been told in the past that we should build a workshop or like a one-day course around the book. Do you have any plans to do something like that?
Yeah. So, the way I think of my book, it finally dawned on me about 2 months ago. I told my wife, I said, writing a book is telling a story like 30 different ways, right? Because you've got to write the book, and then you've got to write the chapter names, and then you've got to write the section names, and then you've got to design a cover and the cover art and the font and the color. And the place that I'm at right now is I've got a variety of video treatments of it, so 3 or 4 minutes at a time, which is sort of like, here's a leadership minute, an hour-long keynote speech, and then half-day and full-day seminars that go with that. So it all kind of depends on the amount of time and a company's budget, both in terms of dollars and the amount of resources that they have to focus on something. But yeah, you got to kind of slice it up into all those different delivery methods and kind of portions so people can decide how much they want to take at a time.
Mm-hmm. And so we probably have to wrap up in the next couple of minutes. For the reasons I've already told you, we're using somebody else's conference room.
That's a good reason. Yeah.
And is there any technique that you're using from a marketing standpoint to increase, aside from going on podcasts and things like that, what else are you doing to get the word out about the book?
Well, I'm a believer in a system from a guy named Tim Grahl, Your First 1,000 Books. And one of the things that I'd heard this from other sources as well. One of the things that he really says is, if you sort of throw your bread upon the water, put your stuff out on the internet, it's just like, don't confuse that with a marketing campaign, because it's not marketing. And one of the things that he has really put out there is to say, you need to have a list of people who care about you and about your success. So one of the things that I've cultivated over the last year is a list of people that I've worked with or known for many, many years, and explain to them what I'm up to and why I'm doing it, right? There are too many people who spend their day in a job saying, my job is easy, but working here is hard. I want to help people to get away from that. I want the workplace to be a better place to work, because it'll make the organization more successful, and success breeds opportunity, and opportunity is what makes the world go round. So I have a group of people that are between 50 and 100 people that I reach out to regularly as a way to amplify that message and to get that message out through all the usual social media opportunities. I'm also trying to do a full spectrum thing where I'm blogging, of course, doing podcasts. I've got some video that I'm going to be adding to my site within the next couple of weeks, and then just kind of stay relevant and stay active, stay out there. People forget really quickly. We're all hit by so many things every day, so just kind of keep it coming, keep reinforcing the message in different ways.
And where can people find your blog and your site?
So it's my name, D.L. Brouwer, spelled the way you mentioned earlier, BROUWER.com. So there's currently an offer on there for the launch, because that's, as you pointed out earlier, that just happened today. But you can sign up for the blog there as well.
And what is the offer? What is the offer for the launch?
So the offer for the launch is if you go out and buy the book on Amazon, and then send your receipt to returnonleadership@gmail.com, to that email, you'll get access to bonus materials. The bonus materials are a bunch of fun things that basically wouldn't fit in the book. I've got a bunch of sea stories of like, yes, that really happened. Yes, the engine caught fire halfway through a catapult stroke on USS Enterprise. Yes, we found a Soviet submarine 2 miles off the port bow of USS Enterprise when no one knew it was there. So there's some sea stories, but then more practically, there are worksheets that take the last section of the book and break it down into, hey, you read it in the book. Here are worksheets that you can actually lay out that communications plan. You can really figure out the kind of relationship that you need to build and how to do that. And then there's a variety of resources like that. So that's the offer.
So, and that sounds like something that our listeners could take advantage of as well. And one of the things that we can offer up to you is Dean Bunshu, who we mentioned before, and Bunker Labs. They are connected with a gentleman that has a podcast called Cigars and Sea Stories.
Oh.
Also a naval veteran. I think he's got about 200 episodes in. And from what I understand, he records either locally here or near locally. I've not personally met him yet, but I'm sure we can use like a couple degrees of separation to get you two in touch with each other. Because that sounds like something that would be great material for his podcast.
It sounds cool. I was part of that crew that flew in the North Arabian Sea at the height of the Cold War. And
wow.
There's stuff that happened. I mean, yeah. I've had a Soviet cruiser point their missile launchers at me from about 400 yards away and track me as we flew by. And, you get to see the blood red decks of a Russian ship. It's just like, yeah, that's real.
Jeez.
Wow.
I have a similar story. I'm about 25% away from my sales goal, and there's only a couple months left in the year to hit it. So I feel like we're simpatico there.
Just do what I tell you to do, and it'll be fine, or you're out of here.
That sounds really, really familiar.
Are you motivated now?
So motivated. Yeah. No, but honestly, like all kidding aside, Dennis, we appreciate you coming on to the podcast. And it will be right now, after we stop the broadcast, it's going to upload completely unedited to YouTube Live. We're going to go in and cut out some of the edits where we were just messing around and we were instant messaging you as we were, trying to get everything on the air. So all that's going to be available like within the hour, and then the podcast will be published Sunday morning. So this coming Sunday, you'll be able to hear the interview. And we look forward to keeping in touch with you. And as things progress, we'd love to have you back on sometime to hear how the book's gone, how you might have pivoted from a marketing standpoint, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'd love to do it. I really enjoy it. Appreciate the opportunity. And when that becomes available on Sunday, if it's okay with you guys, I'll absolutely point to that from my website.
Please.
And, I assume that would be all right, but you never know.
We honestly, we rely on the marketing of our guests to get the word on the podcast out there. So we appreciate that.
Great. Well, you got a cool concept here. I'm happy to be a part of it.
Thank you. Right. Yeah, thank you so much. And so for our listeners, obviously you can follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, as well as Instagram. And so you can follow all of those just by looking up TriangleCast on any one of those platforms. And please be sure to listen to us, review us, and subscribe. And Dennis Brouwer, we appreciate you coming on. What's the title of your book one more time?
The Return on Leadership.
The Return on Leadership. And again, that goes live today. That's September 12th, 2017. Be sure to check that out on Amazon.com, or you can just go into the show notes and see a link to the book. Everybody out there, I am Jason Juneau.
I'm Corey Jeffries.
And Dennis, thanks again for joining us.
All right.
Take care, Dennis.
Bye, everybody.